Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our fourth webinar of the year. This is our free Wednesday night webinar series. Excuse me as I'm distracted, letting people in at the same time as talking. Multitasking is not a natural thing for a guy. Tonight, I'm really happy to welcome in my colleague, Renee McGregor. Renee has presented for me a number of times before on our course and in other places. She is a sports dietitian who has specialized in this topic called Red S, which has become a more popular or more regularly spoken about term over the last few years. Related somewhat to disordered eating, but she'll explain that to you more. And it's a very needed area in general population, but also in sport. So tonight we're going to keep to the usual format. I'm going to let Renee present for 40, max 45 minutes. We'll do a quick ad break where I'll just tell you about our upcoming CISN course, and then we'll go to Q&A. So we'll run until about 7 o'clock UK time with the webinar, unless there's a lot of questions coming in. Okay, so Renee, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, everybody, for giving up your Wednesday evening to listen to me. As Ian said, I have specialized in this, this area and many others, but this is definitely one of my specialist areas. And I run a regular clinic for people with Red S as well. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour because we've only got 45 minutes, but hopefully I can give you enough information that you can at least start to appreciate the complexity of it, but also how you might pick it up, like you might see signs in some of your clients and then what to do if that's the case. So I guess the first thing is, what do we mean by Red S and how does it differ from an eating disorder? Because one of the questions I get asked all the time is, well, when you describe what Red S is, or in some descriptions, when it's described, people say, well, that's just an eating disorder, surely, or it's the, anorexia athletica that we used to hear about. Well, Red S actually came originally from, it was previously known as the female athlete triad. And for those of you who don't know, the female athlete triad was a condition that we saw in female athletes mainly, or only, in the sense that it was linked to their low energy availability and then that affecting their menstruation, which then had a negative impact on their bone health. And we saw this in female athletes. And for a long time, that's what we thought we had. However, as time moved on, and I think it was like back in 2014, the IOC created this consensus group, and they started to realize that it wasn't just females, it affected everybody, males and females. But not only that, it also affected every single biological function within the body. Now, what's interesting to me is, having had a clinical background in dietetics where I actually worked in anorexia on wards and in units, a lot of the symptoms that we associate with Red S are also the symptoms we see in people who are in restrictive eating disorders. So there's a very close link. And so it's really interesting kind of merging both my clinical knowledge and sports nutrition knowledge to work in this field, because you see so much overlap. And one of the frustrations I have is actually that the clinical world doesn't often listen to the sports science world, and the sports science world doesn't often listen to the clinical world. And so you have this kind of real gap in knowledge where we could, if we work together, we could actually improve care and improve prevention of this issue. So REDS, as I said, stands for relative energy deficiency in sport. And it kind of works on a continuum. It's like eating disorders. Although we have like specific criteria in eating disorders, and we have the DSM manual that kind of says, anorexia is, you need to have X, Y, and Z, and with bulimia, you need to have X, Y, and Z. The problem with that is that a lot of people are being missed because we're waiting to basically diagnose people based on specific criteria. And I don't necessarily agree with that. So I actually think eating disorders and disordered eating all work on a bit of a continuum, and so does Red S. And the fact that we have this accidental Red S, which is very unintentional. This is something that we do see And you do see it quite a bit in sport, where an athlete just would not understand, just doesn't appreciate just how much energy they actually require in order to support their training, their general kind of movement every day, but also biological function. And they just miss it. You know, like they'll think about fueling for their swim session, but they might not think about the fact that they commute to work every day, because in their mind it's just an easy session. It's not, it's just an easy ride, so I don't use energy, which of course is wrong, because the body doesn't differentiate between exercise, training, or movement fundamentally. So unintentional REDs people can fall into. Now, sometimes what can happen is if you fall into unintentional REDs due to potentially rapid low energy availability and maybe weight loss, you don't always get weight loss, you can then fall into more disordered and then what we call intentional RED-S. So intentional RED-S is fundamentally when somebody is consciously making a decision to reduce their energy intake and or increase their exercise output. And it is very much psychologically linked. It's not really about the food or the exercise, which we'll talk about as we go through, but it is definitely a conscious decision, and it's a behavior, and it's often got lots of kind of psychological links to it. So while RED-S, whether it's unintentional or intentional, can present with the same symptoms, there's a real difference in potentially how you respond to them. So with unintentional RED-S, it can be quite quick in the sense that once you have identified the individual has a problem and they're in low energy availability, you would provide them with the right nutritional strategy, which they will put in place. And hopefully within a few months, everything will start to restore and regulate, and they can go back to their sport a lot more robust and resilient with the knowledge of how to fuel appropriately. When you're working with intentional or disordered RED-S, if you want to call it that, it's much more complicated, because it's not as simple as here's a meal plan, off you go, because it is so much more than just about food. And so actually this takes a lot longer to regulate, because you're actually working with individuals that need psychological support and behavioral support, and challenging to their belief systems and their perceptions of self, as well as learning to manage expectation, not just providing them with nutritional knowledge. So it's a lot more complex. So this is quite interesting, and I think kind of starts to help us to understand why this is happening and why we're seeing it. And as Ian said, we do see this in the sports world, but we're also seeing it very much in the recreational sports world. And in fact, the latest study, which came out a couple of years ago, shows, in fact, it was only last year, showed that prevalence of LEA, so low energy availability, which precedes REDs, in the recreational population could be somewhere between 43 and 70%. And you kind of have to ask yourself, why? Why is that happening? So there are four main pathways that lead to dysfunctional eating behavior. And I tend to use this term dysfunctional eating behavior rather than an eating disorder, just because, like I said, it's much more broad term, and it means that we can actually kind of encompass a lot more people who are suffering and struggling, rather than just focusing on specific criteria and then a lot of people being missed and not getting the support and the help they need. So firstly, it's really important to understand that often dysfunctional eating behavior does come from a genetic and biological basis, in that individuals are generally much more susceptible to developing these dysfunctional behaviors. You'll often see these individuals because they tend to be that personality type A, and this is why we often see it in sport as well, because again, athletes tend to be this personality type that is much more susceptible, and that kind of perfectionist driven mentality. The other pathway is addiction, and we just saw earlier that if you've got exercise dependency, then you're 4 times more likely to develop more times more likely to develop an eating disorder as well, dysfunctional eating behavior. So we know that when you have two extreme behaviors, they can often sit parallel and kind of work side by side. And something I see quite often is that individuals, I see it the other way around as well, where an individual may have had an eating disorder when they were a teenager, and in their mind they're recovered because they hit a milestone in terms of a weight, but actually psychologically they didn't get the support and the understanding of why they've developed these behaviors. but they found sport instead, and then they project everything onto sport and become obsessive and addicted to sport. And everything's fine until they get injured, and then the wheels fall off, and then they can't cope. So we know that these two definitely sit side by side. And one of the problems when you have an exercise dependency and an eating dysfunctional eating behavior is that the comorbidity of it means it's a much more complicated environment to work in. And it's kind of, sometimes you have to decide, what are you going to tackle first? And that's a lot more complicated. The third pathway is this kind of trauma stress pathway, which I guess is kind of what fundamentally eating disorders originated from, in the sense we understand that an eating disorder is a method of avoiding emotional risk. It's a way of trying to numb and not feel some of the difficult emotions that go on, whatever the trauma, whether the trauma is something like sexual abuse, or the trauma is a loss of a parent or a spouse or a child, or if the loss is, or the trauma is due to bullying. Like, trauma can be anything, but trauma generates emotions that often we don't want to experience, because humans do not like feeling negative emotions. We are biologically hardwired to avoid them, and we will find means and ways of doing it. And although it's not a conscious decision, what we do know is that when you food can be a way of numbing or avoiding or distracting you from emotions that you don't want to experience. And then the final pathway is probably the one that everybody talks about, which is the kind of social environmental, is why kind of the place where people talk about diet culture and the narrative and the pressure we all feel. And I think it is a really relevant and important pathway. I don't think it necessarily always causes it, but I think it 100% contributes to the narrative that we all feel the pressure, and kind of sets us up to kind of experience this sense of unworthiness that then means we go in search of trying to find ways of making ourselves feel better. So just to kind of bring that all together, really what we're looking at is you've got somebody who is susceptible. So I've put the athlete mentality, but this could be anybody. And often the kind of traits you see are that they're high achievers, they're pretty determined, they're self-critical, obsessive, sensitive, perfectionist, compulsive. I always put this slide up and this personality trait up and then go, yeah, that's me. And it's not that being this personality type means you're definitely going to develop an eating disorder, but it puts you at a high susceptibility, because you tend to have the traits that could, when put in the right psychosocial environment, can generate these dysfunctional behaviors. And so sport is definitely one of the environments that we see, because it's very competitive. And especially when you're looking at junior sports in particular, there's very little support for juniors. They don't really have the kind of the sports psychology or the dietitian or the physio, really. And also often it's incredibly competitive in the sense that there's a lot of athletes trying to get 1 or 2 spots. And so that in itself generates high expectations, high standards they just don't know how to manage, just don't know how to deal with. And particularly when you're working with teenagers, we know that, they haven't yet developed fully in terms of their brain, their frontal cortex hasn't developed fully, which means they can't rationalize. They tend to very much work with their limbic brain, which is the kind of the brain associated with our feelings and our emotions. So everything is very feeling and emotion, and they don't understand it. And so this again is why they go in search of ways of trying to avoid emotional risk. And then, as I said before, we have these societal ideals, which has become so much worse with the rise of social media. And we see it all the time. And one of my clients last night sent me this horrific video of TikTok, which I don't really understand, but with TikTok, when you put in an area that you're interested in, what can happen is it sets up this logarithm, but you can't ever change it. So you're constantly being given this information and this, what I eat in a day and how I do this and how I detox, and that's all you're seeing. And so if you're constantly seeing this starts to generate sound bites and then a narrative within ourselves that that's what we should be doing because that's what's normal. So you put all these 3 things together and you create the perfect storm. So this is a slide that I've borrowed from my colleague, Dr. Nikki Kay, who's a sports endocrinologist, but it kind of just helps you to understand what is going on. I'm going to talk a little bit about energy availability in a second, but this middle column is kind of where we want people to be, where you've got enough energy to support all biological processes. So that's everything. That's your hormones, your brain, your circulatory system, your lungs, your digestive system, everything. But then you've also got enough energy to meet all your energy demands. And we have to put energy demands for training load. In that, I put in also your walking, your commuting, whatever else might be going on. So if we reduce the amount of energy availability, the body will always prioritize movement. So all the food will always go to movement, which means there's then not enough energy left to allow for biological process to occur. And similarly, if we increase our training demand, but we don't increase our nutrition at the same time, then we're in the same position where there's just not enough energy for biological process to occur. So this is a fairly key slide, which I'm sure some of you will know and understand already. Most of you will be aware of kind of the energy requirements in terms of sort of things like your basal metabolic rate and your thermic effect of food. And obviously then on top of that, you have the energy cost of movement. So energy requirements are obviously very different for different people based on so many factors. And our BMR is also impacted a little bit by how lean we might be. So this may be slightly higher in some individuals, and particularly in athletes, we see it's much higher, and particularly in lean females, we see it's much higher. So one of the things that's been coming out in research recently is that, for a very long time, we have been underestimating how much fuel female athletes actually need. So this is a really important aspect to understand. And energy availability is the available energy that is left over once you have removed the amount of energy needed for all movement and all training. So if we say, for an argument's sake, we have an athlete that is training, let's say 90 minutes a day at a moderate intensity every day. So they're probably utilizing in the region of, let's say, 800 to 1,000 calories a day, but they're only taking in 2,000 calories because that's what they've heard is what they need to be taking. So 1,000 of that is already gone, which means they've got 1,000 left over. And that 1,000 calories is then divided by their fat-free mass. And it does have to be their fat-free mass. And remember, fat-free mass is it's everything that is not your body fat. So it's your bones, and it's your capillaries, and it's your tissues, and it's your brain and everything else, but it's just not your body fat. And if that number falls below 35 calories per kilo, we understand that seems to be some of the tipping point for biological function to stop. However, new research is emerging all the time, and we're starting to see this number may actually be as high as 55 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass in athletes, which is why it's so difficult. And I think one of the other big things about this is that we're working on arbitrary units to a certain degree, because it's really, really hard to work out how much somebody is utilizing, because although we have all this sport tech, none of it's particularly reliable. It's also really hard to know how much they're eating, because again, like I don't remember everything I eat. So unless you're actually logging it every minute of every day, it's really hard. But equally, some of the food apps and stuff that are available at the moment, they're also not particularly credible, and they can add on things. I was talking to a client this morning, an athlete this morning, and saying, she was using MyFitnessPal, which is like my worst nightmare, because it calculates all the carbohydrate, but it uses it adds up even vegetables. Well, I'm really sorry, but vegetables are not going to give you any energy. They may well be a carbohydrate, but in terms of the energy they provide, it's minimal, because they're just cell wall. So when you're looking at carbohydrate requirements and somebody needs 5 grams per kilogram of body weight, and their totals are saying they are getting that, well, actually 200 of that is coming from vegetables, they're not getting that at all. And this is where the issues come. And it's one of the reasons why I really, really hate food tracking apps. And also, I really don't like sport tech, full stop. But this is a really important thing. This is where we get problems, because it's so difficult to really work out how much somebody needs. However, What we do know is that when somebody is in low energy availability, there are signs that we will see, and there are things that you can pick up on. So one of the biggest signs, well, not one of these, somebody can present with all of these or some of these, and there's also some in here that they have other things as well that are going on. So one of the things we see is a depressed immune system, for example. And Ian and I were just talking prior to jumping on the webinar that we're both seeing an increase in autoimmune conditions. Well, this is there definitely seems to be a link. There's no research on it at the moment, but there definitely seems to be a link with low energy availability and long periods of time of low energy availability, and people then developing autoimmune conditions such as glandular fever and rheumatoid arthritis and so on and so on. So one of the things that we often see is digestive issues, and we see this situation of gastroparesis and also a dysbiosis. So gastroparesis is basically just a slow movement of food through the digestive tract. And a lot of athletes will consider this to be a food intolerance or IBS. And so they'll go in search of an answer. And often if they go to a person who doesn't identify they've got low energy availability, they'll probably be given an exclusion diet, which then makes the whole situation a lot worse, because again, they reduce their energy availability even further. So it's really important you do a proper assessment. Dysbiosis is obviously the change in the microbiome. And what we know is that obviously there's a big link between microbiome and our health, both our physical health, our immune health, but also our mental health. And what we know is that extreme exercise and exercising in restrictive environments can lead to this dysbiosis where the bacteria changes and it's not actually working for you anymore. So again, that may well be a reason why we're seeing so many autoimmune conditions. And again, there's massive area of research that I would love to be able to get my hands on, but someone needs to actually do it, and it won't be me. So the other thing that we often see in low energy availability is a down regulation of metabolism. And often why people get missed is because you don't always, in fact, rarely do you see weight loss. The reason being, as we said, the body will always prioritize movement. And so when it's exercising a lot, it will try and maintain that, but it will down regulate the metabolism to preserve energy. So often you don't see changes to body at all. And if anything, you might start to see somebody who looks lean, but when you do their body composition, actually their body fat is higher than you'd expect because their body's holding on to more body fat. And, actually their metabolic rate is down regulated significantly. One, because of the loss of lean muscle mass, but also because it's trying to prevent any further loss in the body. We often see endocrine dysregulation, which is, again, that's the sign that most females will present with, which is you get menstrual function changes and also eventual loss. So this might be that their periods get lighter, they may get change in frequency, and then eventually they stop altogether. The difficulty is when somebody is on contraception, because it basically masks this going on. So you then have to look at other signs to see if someone is in low energy availability. And in guys, what we often see is a decrease in morning erectile function. So if this drops to below less than 5 a week, it could be a sign. We can't rule out the fact that stress also has an implication on testosterone levels, which can also be a sign, but this could be a sign that somebody is in low energy availability. One of the key things to remember is that females are much more sensitive to low energy availability because fundamentally we are meant to reproduce, and if the body is not in a suitable is more of a hostile environment for reproduction, then that's why our body will kind of go, nope, we're not having this because we can't host a baby here. And this decline in estrogen and testosterone then has a negative effect on our mood and also can increase our anxiety, because both estrogen and testosterone are what are known as serotonin uptake receptors. So they help you to take serotonin into the brain, which obviously we know makes you feel good. So estrogen and testosterone have much wider properties than everybody thinks. They just think it's like a reproductive hormone, but actually they're really important for our lean muscle mass. They're really important for our exercise, adaptation to our exercise. They're important for our mood. They're important for our proprioception. So again, these are all things to be mindful of. And then again, like physiologically, you will start to see sleep disturbances, because a hungry body can't sleep. A hungry body will always go in search of food. Poor adaptation to training, and recurrent ligament and tendon injuries. This usually occurs before bone stress, but hugely, if you're not having periods, if your testosterone level is low, that is going to have a negative impact on your bones. And so we do see a much higher prevalence of bone stress and bone injuries. And then if you do have somebody who has got the intentional reds, then you often start to see this psychological change in them as well, in that they become very irrational, they can become quite withdrawn and socially isolated, and it creates a lot more anxiety. And, you know, we know that when somebody is socially isolated, our negative thoughts are more dominant. And so the whole thing becomes worse and worse and more complicated. So it's a complex scenario. And just to kind of highlight here the importance of hormones. So the fact that they basically affect every single area within the body. So if you get this down regulation of hormones, then you're going to start to see down regulation of all these areas within our body. So this is kind of fundamentally explaining what is going on physically. If you have restrictive eating or low energy availability, exercise dependency, what will happen is we increase stress hormone cortisol, and we decrease the hormone leptin. Leptin being a really important hormone in our fat cells and really helps to regulate appetite, but also body weight and a huge number of other processes in the body, as I'm reading more and more. When we have a constantly chronically high cortisol, this will block our hypothalamic pituitary axis, and the low leptin levels also have an impact on our luteinizing hormone production. And luteinizing hormone is the hormone that is really relevant for ovulation. So when this is low, it means ovulation is not going to occur. And this is then what causes the decrease in menstrual function. So all of this then starts to impact the thyroid gland. And we see on the blood test results, we'll see a decrease in T4 and T3. Now, this doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to have levels below normal, but you will see that they're right on the bottom end of normal. And this would indicate that somebody is in preservation mode. A low T3 is directly linked to energy availability and specifically carbohydrate availability. So when we see this is low, we know that somebody is not fueling appropriately. And then we get this down regulation within the body of all biological processes. And then when it comes to sort of the psychological decline, you know, we see this kind of anxiety and stress and this low self-worth and discomfort that tends to be sometimes the cause. We want to avoid it. We want to deny it. We want to numb it. And this is what we then project onto food and body image, maybe even our training. These are ways of trying to attain that worth. You know, if I get a great running result, then I'll feel better about myself, except that you don't, because then move on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And then this is what starts this dysfunctional behaviors. And once we get into this dysfunctional behaviors, it obviously starts to change the neurotransmitters in our brain. And that makes it very difficult for us to be able to see that our behaviors are actually a threat to us. We lose the ability to evaluate threat, basically, because it affects our frontal cortex. So how do we go about diagnosing REDS? So REDS needs to be diagnosed, is a diagnosis by exclusion. We do have to make sure that it is REDS and nothing else that is going on. So we will do this through the nutrition and training assessment. So looking at kind of what someone's eating, how much they're training, are they resting, et cetera, et cetera. We will do a full weight and body composition history, because it is really important, particularly in females. If you get a female that presents and says, oh, I haven't had menstrual function for, you know, a year or months or whatever, understanding what age they were when their menstrual cycle started, understanding what their body composition was like at that point. These are all really relevant and can help to give us some indicators of what we're where we need to go back to fundamentally. We'll do a full assessment of the physical status with blood. So we do a full blood spectrum. And obviously we have to do a psychological and behavioral assessment. We have to look at that relationship with food and exercise, that relationship with self. These are all really, really important. And through this very, very thorough process, we can then ascertain if somebody has RED-S or if there's something else that's going on. And I'm not going to read these all out. And so you will all get, so you might not always see it. And I think this is one of the things that I get frustrated in that a lot of individuals that I work with often get turned away because they're seen as being healthy, they're seen as doing the right thing, but they're not. So like I said, we do tend to look at particular markers, and we're generally looking at things like iron and thyroid function and vitamin D and hormones, and also immune function, as well as stress hormones, to see what is going on with someone. So I'm going to quickly run through this because I'm conscious of time, but some of the common mistakes that we see that cause people to move into red S is this insufficient fueling, like we said, intentional or unintentional, insufficient recovery, both physically and nutritionally, fixating on a weight over a performance, which is a big thing we see obviously in a lot of sports, over competing and training, cherry picking evidence, which again is becoming easier and easier to do with the likes of social media, and then developing limiting beliefs. And what I mean by limiting beliefs is that we often create this belief system. Like, for example, we hear about this 10,000 steps a day, that if we do 10,000 steps a day, we're really healthy. Now, when you go and look at the archives, I cannot still find a paper that says it is exactly 10,000 steps a day we should be doing. And it transpires that actually we plucked that number because it was something that could be achievable and it would get people moving who are not moving. Great. But the problem is that so many people have held on to that belief that if they don't do 10,000 steps a day, somehow they are unhealthy, or somehow something awful is going to happen to them, that it then becomes this limiting belief that stops them from moving forwards, because by believing they must do their 10,000 steps a day, it provides them with a false insecurity that they are healthy. So it's just one way to look at it. The other big major the other big major thing that has contributed a lot to red S is this whole training low. Again, some of you will probably know what training low is. And it came from the cycling world, where we looked at where they were often encouraged to do some training sessions in a carb depleted state because it provided some adaptive responses. However, what is often missed when you are looking when you are looking at the information that's being put out there, is that these sessions should only really be completed at a particular threshold. It also doesn't mean that your overall intake of carbohydrates stops. It just means that you might do that particular session in a low carb state, but then you need to actually make sure that your overall intake of carbohydrate is still being met for the rest of the day. And we also know from studies that actually if you stay in a chronically low carbohydrate state, so over 3 weeks, it can start to have a negative consequence on both health and performance. So this is where a lot of the information went wrong, in that training low, people see it as constantly training in a fasted state or in a carb depleted state, but actually it's not about that. It's about choosing a couple of sessions a week, maybe a recovery session that you do at a particular threshold and you only do for a certain period of time. It's not about doing every session and all intensities at all. We also have seen that carbohydrate availability low carbohydrate availability has been linked to things like a suppression in our leptin levels, which again we saw had an effect on our luteinizing hormone, decreased bone activity post-training. So there's been some good papers that have shown that if we don't have enough carbohydrate, particularly in that recovery phase, it can actually have a negative consequence on our bone health. A depressed immune system, as we've talked about, and obviously the impact on gut biome, as we've already spoken about. So how do you recover from REDS? Once you've worked it out, once you've realized that somebody has REDS, what do you have to do? Well, actually, what science has shown us is that carbohydrate availability around key sessions is really the most essential aspect of it. So energy availability is important, but carbohydrate availability particularly is really critical. So this is just kind of some general guidance, and obviously it's going to be fairly different from different individuals, but it's some, some generic information. Like we said, energy availability should never drop below 35 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass, but I'm questioning if that's actually high enough. I would say it probably is. I think probably we're seeing that people need to be more like 45 calories per kilogram. We do know that there's a couple of papers that have shown that if you're doing moderate intensity training, then for females, it seems to be there should be a minimum of 45 calories per kilogram of fat-free mass, but it might be much higher. And we don't have any information on males at the moment. There's no research that's been done. Carbohydrate requirements for sort of similar training days, 60 to 90 minutes, should be somewhere between 5 to 7 grams per kilogram of body weight. And the carbohydrate availability and timing around training is critical. Post-training recovery needs to be within that 30-minute window in order to support your overall adaptation, but also to make sure that you are meeting your requirements and not falling to low energy availability. And then protein requirements and fat requirements, I mean, they may vary depending on the sport, but just to give you some numbers there. And again, just to kind of, what do I mean by carbohydrate availability? I think probably most of you will know what I mean by carbohydrate availability is just making sure that there is sufficient carbohydrate available throughout the day. It's not like big amounts at one end of the day or two. It's actually that distribution throughout the day that seems to be really, really important. And like I said, particularly around training. And then just to sort of summarize, and we've kind of been through all this, but I kind of quite like to put a little summary slide. So again, sort of easy, if you need to ever kind of have that information to hand, you've got it there. And one thing we do say is that when you do have somebody who has RED-S or overtraining syndrome, and that's been identified and diagnosed, but they're then ready to return back to training with guidance, we would never, ever, ever recommend fasted training or carb depleted training in these individuals at all. Even if they are well and restored, we just wouldn't do it anymore because their bodies are quite sensitive and it tends to push them back into a negative place. So I guess kind of one of the things I wanted to say is that RED-S never delivers. It tends to actually create more problems than good. And I'm not saying people intentionally do RED-S, but I think if we can learn to kind of become aware of it and learn to identify it, then we can help people to understand that it's never going to be the thing that helps them to move forward, and obviously help, and then we can signpost them to the right places to get support. So when we're looking at recovery, it's very much a multidisciplinary approach. Now, whether that multidisciplinary approach is, you, a coach, the athlete, and maybe a physio or a medic, that, it's up to you. We have a very mixed team within our team, including an endocrinologist and a psychiatrist, and a behavioral therapist and a dietitian. So we are quite we do tend to work with coach as well. It's really important to set realistic goals in the sense that, somebody has had a stress fracture and has been in low energy availability. Is it realistic for them to think they can do a marathon in 16 weeks? Probably not. So actually setting these realistic goals, and also setting realistic goals around body composition and what's an ideal for them. Like, that's a really important feature and something that is often the hardest bit for athletes to take on board, that maybe the ideal they've got in their head is not the ideal that's going to work for them in terms of their performance, and it's their performance. We need to get that hormonal and biochemical regulation. So we definitely need to be helping people return back to kind of normal numbers so that their body can work. So looking at that thyroid function and that estrogen and testosterone. We need to restore energy availability and or weight if that is necessary. Like I said, it doesn't always come with weight loss. And we would do this through mechanical eating, not intuitive eating, because athletes in this stage probably don't really know how to fuel properly. So we have to give them that guidance. It'll be a phased return to training. In a profile and bone health. We'll be doing a lot of work on kind of challenging food and training beliefs and those negative perceptions that are happening within themselves. And if an athlete's bone health has been affected, if a female athlete's bone health has been affected, then we'd need to consider is this indicative of using hormone replacement therapy to support their bone health while they're also trying to support their energy availability? So I guess kind of trying to, I think I'm pretty much on time. I think kind of where I wanted to get to is that our bodies, as you can see, are pretty complicated. And I think what happens in the sports world is that we so much focus on performance outcomes, we often forget that the body is intricate and it needs support in terms of endocrine, biochemical, physiological, and psychological. And so understanding that you can't necessarily affect one area without it affecting another is really important as a practitioner, like really appreciating that, okay, somebody wants to improve their body composition. One, is that legitimate and is it necessary? And, or are they already at their optimal place? And that's the bit you have to always make that decision on. And then how do you do that appropriately so that they actually don't push themselves into unintentional red S? Any questions?
Thanks, Renee. You can unshare now. And I'll share all your details tomorrow by email. So I'm just going to quickly share mine. We'll have a quick ad break. So I wanted to tell everyone that our next intake of the Certificate of Integrative Sports Nutrition starts in June. And we've got early birds closing next week. All right, so just a little bit about the course. This is the only course in the world that brings integrative thinking into sports nutrition. Renee talked about performance nutrition a few times there, and that's the prevailing kind of approach out there. But this aspect of health is what we try and work through and bring in experts like Renee and many other amazing lecturers to focus on what we call health feeds performance. So we bed down module 1 with this integrative view around health, and then go into a sort of applied performance nutrition in module 2, pulling in a lot of question marks around sort of prevailing thoughts. Just like Renee went through the calorie kind of limitations there, we do the same. Just ask question marks of what people think they know through textbook nutrition. And then module 3, we bring in a lot of different specialists, practitioners, and some academics. It's much more practitioner focused. So it's more practitioners and fewer academics, but we keep it very science focused. So these are the usual costs. We have modules 1, 2, and 3, which cost £2,300. And then we have a natural sports cookery course, which I thoroughly believe that food sourcing and preparation is key to athletes. So we have that as an additional approach. We have discounts. So if you're a band member, a BASIS member, you get a 10% discount. Students currently studying either final year or postgrad get a 20% discount. But with the early bird, we're knocking a couple of £100 off these prices with the discount. So you can get these prices with the other discounts, and that ends the end of next week. So Easter Friday. What else am I going to say? We have a payment plan as well. We recognize that a lot of people, especially practitioners who are reliant on their patients or clients to come through, have had a rough ride through COVID and restrictions and so on. So we're taking off the surcharge for the payment plan this year. So means you can spread that payment out a lot easier. Okay, so there's our contact details if you'd like to get in touch and ask questions. Okay, right, stop share, and we're going to go to questions. So we've got a few lined up already, and we're going to start with Sam. So Sam asked, what paper was the graph on the previous slide? And it was the page where you mentioned your colleague Nikki. and you'd borrowed the
it's actually
diagram from Nikki.
the paper is one of Nikki's papers, and it was I think it was low energy availability in cyclists, from what I remember. That she's done quite a few, but that was the one that come from a cyclist. So if you put Nikki's name into PubMed, you'll see her paper basically.
And everyone will get these slides tomorrow, so you can look at the particular slide and get more detail there. Okay, Sabine, I'd like to know if below the kilocalorie levels that you're obviously recommending for a client, there's a specific risk with deficiency of different nutrients. She mentioned fat, carb, protein. Do you have some examples of athletes' recovery while training for competition at a national or international level? So there's a couple of questions in there.
So, yeah, I mean, I think, as I said, maybe the question came before I got to the end of the presentation, but energy availability is the term that is used generally in journals, and IOC tend to use it as well. But if you go into more detail, we know that carbohydrate availability is one of the key things. Of course, if somebody is in low energy availability, then the likelihood of them having deficiencies in all sorts of vitamins and minerals, as well as kind of the fat, carbs and protein, are problematic. There was a paper that looked at climbers, I think it was 2017, and it showed that climbers generally, even if they were not disordered eating or at risk or didn't have RED specifically, they all tended to underconsume the amount of carbohydrate they actually needed. Protein never seems to be an issue, because I think we've put such a kind of halo on protein that everybody seems to think protein is the fuel that you have to go to, because we've got all these studies that show protein helps you to maintain lean muscle mass. But if you're not eating enough, then sufficient protein is not really going to be particularly helpful, because all you can do is use it for fuel. In terms of recovery, yes, I seem to have missed a couple of slides, so you will get them, but I think sometimes when I'm on the webinar, I think I go too quickly, so but it's fine. There is a slide about kind of modification of training, and it's a really tricky one because every single case is so different, and I can't really highlight that enough. And often that's why we do the blood test results. So looking at the blood test and understanding how to interpret the blood test is really the critical thing. And I would say you probably do need to have a clinical background to be able to understand them and then be able to kind of translate them. It's fine, I could go through them with you, but that wouldn't be sufficient. Like, even my team come to me, even though they know they're clinical dietitians, they'll come to me and go, well, what does this mean? Why is this happening? So I think it's really important, but the blood test will inform us on whether somebody needs to stop training, whether we need to modify training, what needs to happen. But in general, what we find is that when somebody is in quite a big deficit, it's actually really, really difficult to consume enough energy to get them out of the deficit to then allow them to compete. So it's a difficult one because athletes want to always compete, but sometimes you have to provide them with the relevant information of what they should do and give them the longer game. And I've had a few athletes where they have stepped out of competition for a particular year, knowing that actually they put all their energy into getting better, they can then compete at the following year. So it's a difficult one to answer because everybody is so different. But I'd say rarely have we been able to support very high level performance and recovery. Often you need to modify the training quite significantly. So people can definitely train, but they need to train at different levels. And as they're
You had a little dropout there, Renee, in your last sentence.
Oh, okay. All I was just saying is that with it's quite rare to be able to support someone in recovery with their full training volume. They usually have to modify training. And I'm not saying they can't train, but often they have to train, definitely have to train intensity and usually volume. And then as their blood biomarkers improve, then we can start talking about how to kind of increase their volume and their training.
Thank you. Okay, from Scott, how does athlete psychological load, such as study and exams, affect low energy availability?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think, again, people underestimate the impact on the brain. Like if we think about it, brain uses 120 to 130 grams of glucose a day to meet its requirements. So if you are obviously in exam stress and exam pressure, again, we know that then has this fight or flight reaction in your body. So you're probably going to utilize more glucose than that. And again, that can definitely impact your overall requirements. But equally, what we find is if somebody is stressed, they will often use that as a reason to not eat. So then again, that can start to affect their intake, and obviously then put them in a position of low energy availability. So it's definitely something that we have to try and support and manage. And a lot of it is about understanding stress and how stress affects our body, and understanding how stress affects you, and what strategies you can put in place to manage that load to improve your relationship with yourself and stress. So we do a big education piece with everybody we work with on self-awareness and autonomy and understanding your behaviors. And I think that's a really important aspect of recovery from RED-S, is understanding what is the purpose of your behavior, what is it trying to do for you, and is it actually working, and is it serving you? And then when you understand that, then you can become more aware. So again, even becoming aware of your personality type, understanding you're a perfectionist, and knowing that you'll always be a perfectionist, so you'll probably always end up beating yourself up. But understanding that can give you permission to then move away from it, if that makes sense.
Okay, next one from Carl, who would like to unmute and ask the question.
Thanks, Ian. So then, just to give you some context prior to my question, so I'm an academic at Liverpool John Moores University. I did my PhD in low energy availability and REDS in combat sports athletes. I actually worked with Professor James Morton and Professor Louise Burke, who were two of the original. So Louise was obviously on the IOC consensus statement, and James and Louise were two of the proponents of the train low methodology. My question actually was, and the only reason why I'm asking this is because I think we need to be very, very, very clear for the audience. Is there any evidence, direct link between LEA and subsequent consequences of REDS or triad? Do you think we're at a stage to be able to say that with confidence?
Yeah, I really do. I think there's information out there. Louise Burke and Kate definitely shows that low energy availability is one of the key reasons why people end up in REDS. So yeah, I do. I think there's sufficient information.
Just to add some further context to that. So a lot of this evidence is based on studies that Anne Laux did in the late 90s and early 2000s in females in laboratory, very elegantly well-designed laboratory studies. If you actually read the RED-S model, and this is coming directly from Louise, a lot of the evidence that's in there is epidemiological. So, and a lot of it is actually based in eating disorders and anorexia nervosa. Now, similarly, for example, I work with Professor Neil Walsh, who's an expert in sports immunology in Liverpool John Moores. We know that low energy availability actually leads to an enhanced upregulation of immune function, not necessarily a suppression. And I've published a bit of work, so converse to some of the stuff that you've said. So in the combat sports athletes, so I published a case study in MedSci last year, where an athlete was in low energy availability for 8 weeks and low carbohydrate availability, and it didn't subsequently result in any consequences of REDS.
That's 8 weeks.
Yeah, now subsequently following that up, we're just about to publish another study in a female athlete over 2 years, of which she spent 50% of the time as well. Now, I'm not refuting that REDS exists. What I'm asking is, do we know with confidence that the causation is low energy availability? Because even if you look at some of the evidence coming out of Nancy Williams and Mary Jane D'Souza's lab very recently, there was a study in 2018 highlighting that menstrual dysfunction can occur at a range of as low as 10 kilocalories of fat-free mass per day to as high as 60.
Yeah, and I said that we don't have enough information about the menstrual cycle. You know, the female athletes, it's a very difficult one to say. I think I think I've also been very clear that it's low energy availability is definitely contributing, but carbohydrate availability also seems to be quite critical in this. And I think RED-S is an accumulation of the stress that the different aspects puts into it. Low energy availability does put somebody into stress, which we know has an effect on the cortisol in terms of cortisol, and that then has an impact on the hypothalamic pituitary axis. So it is a complicated, convoluted situation. But I would say observationally, as well as from the research that I have read, that low energy availability is it is a key indicator of problems in athletes, and definitely recurrent injuries and menstrual dysfunction, which we know anyway from the female athlete triad.
Yeah, I just think, so again, even when you read into these things, I think we've got to be very, very, very careful about the causal link. You know, there was a recent paper highlighting that potentially the contributing factors of RED-S are mitigated by overtraining, not necessarily LEA.
I think what they said, what was looked into was the overlap in all these different things. And I think the problem is that they're all linked, in the sense that overtraining, how can you not say that overtraining is related to like, how can you say it's overtraining and not the low energy availability because somebody's not fueling sufficiently in order to meet their training needs? So I think there's definitely, we know there's overlap in all these different areas, but from, you know, presently being on a consensus group that's looking at this in dance and ballet and aesthetic sports, again, and there's a big group of experts in that, there's enough evidence to suggest that LEA is a big problem and it does contribute towards RED-S.
I'll respectfully disagree, but thank you for answering the question.
Thanks, Carol. Can I just add in a sort of practitioner context from the way I see these things as well? Within sports nutrition, we tend to try and answer specific questions. So the presentation of RED-S, as Renee has shared, is a bunch of different physiological imbalances. It used to be the female triad, and that was opened out to a lot more physiological imbalances. If you throw in one variable like a low energy availability, it can obviously imbalance certain people in certain contexts. You would have to hold that over quite a long period of time to see the consequences, especially in healthy people who start in a healthy state. But, you know, as a practitioner who sees people who have been, you know, pushing their bodies for many years, especially not your 20-year-olds, but maybe your 30, 40, even 50-year-olds. And as Renee said earlier, I've seen a lot of autoimmunity in my clinic in Johannesburg before I moved back to the UK, where you had a lot of people with a lot of life stress. So yeah, it might be low energy availability was one of the contributing factors to that physiological imbalance. Overtraining could be another one relative to their life stress. But then you have to add in sleep, you have to add in toxicity of the environment, you have to add in work stress, family situations. It's a very, very complex scenario. So academically, you have to take one variable and apply it to another variable to measure it within the confines of the science. In a world environment dealing with one person, it becomes a lot more complex, and each person will be very different. So yeah, it's always going to be really, really hard to answer that question, Carl.
Yeah, so, no, Ian, I appreciate that. Thank you for answering it. I mean, I'm just to be clear, I'm also a practitioner myself. I'm I'm
Oh,
on the
cool.
CENAR register. I'm a CENAR practitioner registrant. I'm currently working with athletes. I'm not just an academic, but I think you've just exactly proven the point in my question. It's not just energy availability per se. There are so many other mitigating factors that can cause these dysfunctions and dysregularities that I think people just hone in too much on this magical threshold of low energy availability being causative, and there's a lot more to holistically consider. So thanks for adding that, because I think you've just pretty much hit the nail on the head of what I was trying to say.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks. So yeah, sometimes it sounds like two people are arguing on a point, but actually you end up agreeing in certain ways. And I think Renee, you'll agree with that as well.
I don't think
context.
And I don't think I said anything against that. I've said all the way along, low energy availability is a contributing factor. We have to look at everything. You know, stress hormone is increased by lots of number of different things. And I don't actually focus, if I'm honest, Carl, when I'm working with the clients, I don't focus on energy availability. It's one area, and it's one that I think is really important to address, because people just talk about specific requirements. Like if you use things like, I was talking about that MyFitnessPal aspect, it's done on a logarithm that then makes people under consume significantly. And I think, you know, it's an area that we have to educate on, but we know it's a complex area. We know that it's endocrinologically, it's a very, very complex situation. And when I'm working with clients, it's not just about looking at energy when we're helping, particularly when you're helping females trying to get their menstrual cycle back. You're looking at all different areas, including their training load, including recovery, including the timing of nutrition, including, you know, their sleep and their environments and what's happening to them. So I don't think I'm disagreeing with you, but I think low energy availability cannot be ignored in all of this.
No, thanks very much, Renee. And I think, like you say, it's probably not worth focusing on, given that it's a really difficult thing to measure in the first place.
Totally. It's ridiculous.
Unless you've got a really good handle on body composite, you know, that lean mass tissue, however you measure that. And then, as you've mentioned, you know, as soon as you try and measure energy intake or assess energy intake, and don't even get me started on trying to establish exercise energy expenditure.
Exactly.
It's a difficult thing to do anyway, in practice, never mind in the lab. But thanks very much, guys. And thanks for a great session.
Well, thanks, Carl, for stimulating the conversation there. I respect the work you guys do at Liverpool, John Moore, by the way. Okay, next question. Are you okay for five minutes or so to do a few more questions?
Yeah.
Okay, from Robin, there are lots of protein shakes in the market, but it seems carb intake is more important. What would you recommend in terms of carb liquid intake?
I think, again, like, we know, again, we look at the research, it depends on the sport and depends on the situation. When we're talking about these particular athletes, often they have come from a place where they're not recovering very well. And if they are in a glycogen depleted state, you'd want both carbs and protein. So I think just carbs alone probably wouldn't be the focus, but maybe sometimes it would be. It really depends on the situation you're in. If you're working with an endurance athlete that's not in Red-S, then trying to keep on top of their carbohydrate intake would be something that you would consider, but whether you do it in the immediate after rather than during, and I think afterwards, I definitely recommend both carbs and protein. I don't tend to recommend just protein shakes alone, as in just the whey protein alone, unless I'm working with somebody who has a specific body composition goal they're trying to achieve, and we know that they are in a healthy way, and we're trying to kind of modify their intake a little bit. But again, it's a much more complicated situation than just kind of it's protein or it's carbs. But I think in this situation, I would always recommend carbs and protein. Yes. And
don't forget your veg and your fruit and all the micros rather, and the phytos. Okay, I'm going to cherry pick a wee bit on the questions. Jordi asked, how would be a proper return to play strategy? That is possibly a too complex question. What do you think?
It is really complex, and I'll be honest, we don't have one. And again, there needs to be more research. I think again, everybody is so different, and I've had athletes that we've had to stop training completely, and then we slowly build them up, and it's been a combination of, again, it depends on what they present with. If they've had a lot of stress fractures and a lot of injury, then we have to look at some of the imbalances, what's going on. It's complicated. There isn't, at the moment, we don't have a return to play strategy as such. We work with physios, and we work with a psychiatrist to kind of also help us, sports psychiatrist, to help us indicate if somebody is ready to return to play psychologically, because that's also a big part of it. If they've had an excess dependency, then you need to know whether they're ready to go back. We look at, like I said, we look at blood markers, which helps us to understand where their body might be physically, and is that a good indicator? But often it is a bit of trial and error, sadly. Like, we don't have an absolute strategy.
Thank you. The next question is from me. How does your course compare to the IOC diploma? It's much more practitioner focused, and it is integrative. It goes into functional medicine type approaches, as opposed to more straight line performance nutrition approaches. But Scott, if you want to pop me an email, I can send you more information. Plus, there's more on the website. Thomas, could you confirm using these biomarkers for monitoring is valid and reliable? So I'll just read them out, Renee. We've got leptin, insulin, total and free T3, growth hormone, estrogen, progesterone, and also we've got PYY, oxytocin, IGF, binding protein 1.
I don't look at all of those, by the way. That's not my list.
Do you do a set list, Renee, or do you kind of do a cherry pick for the client?
So Nikki and I pulled together a list that was most appropriate, because obviously the NHS don't do a lot of blood tests. So we had to find tests that could give us indicators of what was going on, that if somebody wanted to go to their GP, they could get. So for example, you can't get T3 on the NHS, and you often can't get cortisol either. So it's kind of, we try and look at the hormones particularly, because that gives a good indicator of what is happening. And we look at thyroid function, and we will look at white cell count, and also hemoglobin, like iron and vitamin D status, because they're the ones you can get easily. And then if Nikki wants something more specific, then she'll usually have to ask for that privately, and she will do that. Leptin is incredibly difficult to get hold of, although I think personally it should be something we should all be looking at, but it's expensive and nobody's doing it fundamentally. It's also not the easiest one it's not as stable either to measure. So getting it to a lab in time is also one of the difficulties. And that's often the biggest problem with biomarkers.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm going to pull two questions together here. Tracy asks, is there another tracking tool for macronutrient and calorie intake other than MyFitnessPal? But I think you've already answered that you don't like tech. No. I don't like tech either. I like mindfulness and self-connection. But then you have talked about the topic of low energy availability. So how do you, track's maybe not the right word, but how do you kind of monitor that somebody is getting enough?
Yeah, it's a good question. And fundamentally, I tend to work on experience, in the sense that, I have worked with many, many, many people over the 20 years that I've been a dietitian. And I can now look at a food intake, and I know whether someone's eating enough or not eating enough. That's not the most scientific way of explaining it, but that's kind of what we do. Some of my dietitians do use sort of dietetic software. I don't necessarily agree with it, and I don't really like them using it that often, but I think sometimes it can be helpful to get an estimate. I think you always got to remember it's going to be an estimate. You're never going to get an absolute, because you can't. It's impossible. So I think a lot of our work is based on how the individual is responding, and how they're particularly like we'll do quite regular blood tests, which helps us to identify what is going on. And so that's kind of one of the big indicators, but also how their body's feeling and how they're feeling. And, you know, things like we don't look at HRV until they are recovered, because we understand that there's a again, because of the stress element, HRV seems to be impacted by low energy availability. So it's not a very useful tool when you're working in this group to start with. So how do I know? I guess I know because we talk with our clients regularly, and we look at their progress through bloods more than anything else. We usually set them quite kind of goals that they have to hit and achieve, which they might not necessarily do, but they tell us they are. But you can often tell from like I've got a client at the moment who he says all the right things to me, but his blood tests are not moving. So we know that he probably isn't doing it, to be fair. Weight's not changing, body composition's not changing. So you've got enough kind of different parameters to identify if someone is moving in the right direction or not.
I think that was a really good answer. Yeah, as a practitioner, you can, if you allow yourself, get very, very good at tuning into the person in front of you. And I think that's more important than any tech can give you. I think if you're early in your career, certain tech can really help build up a picture, and doing the bloods or whatever functional testing, for example, you might be interested in. It builds a picture. But I've started actually describing like the pictures on my wall of Cape Town behind me. If you take all the paint off that, or the print, and start again with your client, and each bit of information is a little bit of coverage of the canvas, and you're building that up. And as you meet them the second or the third time, you're adding to that canvas and get to know your person better. Renee, do you want to tell everyone about your book before you leave, your new book?
Yeah, so we've got a new book that is ready for, will be ready to pre-order next week. It's called More Fuel You. And actually, it goes into a lot of what we've spoken about today. It's not about REDS before car panics. It's not about REDS at all. It's actually a book about learning and understanding yourself, and choosing appropriate nutrition based on you. So it's actually about giving you autonomy and helping you to cut through some of the crap that's out there in terms of what we should be doing, and understanding how the body works and how you feel it ready for you, and also what your goals are. Everybody's different. Some people's goals are actually about just feeling free and enjoying food and being healthy, and some people it's going to be more about a specific outcome, whether it's an ultra marathon or a body composition goal. So yeah, that's out next. Well, it's out for pre-order next week.
Wonderful. And I'd like to just extend my thanks. I know you're a very busy woman, and that was great that you could come on and share this topic, because I think it's really, really important to just get it out there and get it better understood. So thanks again, Renee.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And yeah, thanks to everybody. And I hope you all have a lovely evening.
And we'll see you next month. Hopefully, we've got Paul Loren with his topic of making weight for competitions. Okay, bye for now.